For as long as he could remember, Elias Harlow, a 28-year-old historian, had heard people talk about one old legend. Deep inside Silver Mist Lake, there is a lost city. Some people said the city disappeared after an earthquake. Others said it sank because of a terrible curse. And a few believed it never existed at all, just a story parents told children to make them sleep. But Elias didn't believe in stories. He believed in evidence. And after 10 years of studying maps, ancient documents, and forgotten stories, he finally found something that changed everything. A stone tablet buried under a collapsed farmhouse showing detailed symbols of a city beneath a lake. The stone tablet had one message carved at the bottom. The city of Ardain still breathes below the water. Elias stared at the tablet for hours that night. The words echoed in his mind like a whisper. If this was real, if the city truly existed, it would be the greatest discovery of his career, maybe even of the entire century. But Silver Mist Lake was dangerous. The water was dark, deep, ice-cold, and full of sharp rocks. Fishermen refused to go near the center. Divers never returned. Still, Elias couldn't walk away. The journey begins. 3 weeks later, on a cold morning just before sunrise, Elias reached the lake. Fog covered the water like a blanket. The wind was quiet. The world felt frozen. He carried only a backpack, a lantern, notebooks, and a waterproof case full of research. As he stepped onto the old wooden dock, he felt something strange. The air seemed heavier. The silence felt alive, almost as if the lake was watching him. Elias whispered to himself, 10 years of searching. Please let me be right. He climbed into a small metal boat he rented from a nearby village. The boat creaked loudly in the quiet morning, breaking the silence. Slowly, he paddled toward the center of the lake. The deeper he went, the darker the water became. It turned from blue to gray, and then almost black. He couldn't see a single thing under the surface. He reached the deepest point of the lake. His notebook said it was exactly here, right beneath him, where the lost city should be. Elias leaned over the boat's edge and looked into the water. For a moment he thought he saw a flash of light below, a shimmer, like something glowing at the bottom. His heart jumped. Is that possible? But then the wind suddenly changed. The water rippled violently. The boat rocked. Something, a shadow, moved under him. Slowly, silently, powerfully. Elias froze. It can't be a fish. It's too big. The shadow circled under the boat again. Again. Elias held his breath. And then, the shadow stopped moving. It was directly under him. The lake became quiet again. Too quiet. He whispered, "If I want answers, I have to go down there." His hands were shaking, but he lowered the lantern toward the water. But before the lantern touched the surface, splash! The boat jolted violently. Something hit it from below. Elias fell backward, dropping the lantern. He scrambled to grab the side of the boat. The water bubbled. The shadow moved again. Then, something rose toward the surface. Not a creature, not a rock, something metallic, square, old, carved with carvings. A piece of a building. Elias's eyes widened. The city is real. But before he could touch it, the piece sank again as if pulled down by invisible hands, and the shadow disappeared. Elias sat in the boat, shaking, breathless, staring into the water. One thing was clear. He was no longer searching for the city. The city was watching him. The next day, I woke up feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. The city was still waking up, and the soft light of early morning spilled through my window. I drank a cup of tea, thinking about the plan I had made the night before. Today, I would explore a part of the city that was completely new to me, a neighborhood that I had never visited and knew nothing about. I left my apartment with my notebook and a small bag of essentials. Walking through the streets, I noticed how each block seemed to have its own rhythm and personality. The cafes had different smells, the shops had different colors, and even the people moved differently. I realized that every part of a city has its own story, and observing these details was like learning a new language. I took the metro to the other side of the city, and as the train moved through dark tunnels, I thought about how much my life had changed since I arrived. A few months ago, I would have felt completely lost and intimidated by the city, but now I felt a sense of curiosity and determination that I had never experienced before. Getting off at the station, I stepped into a bustling market area. The energy was overwhelming at first. Vendors shouting prices, children running, music playing from small shops. I walked slowly, taking in every sound and color. I stopped at a fruit stand and asked the vendor the price of apples. Speaking slowly and carefully, I managed to communicate clearly. The vendor smiled and nodded, and I felt a small but significant sense of accomplishment. As I continued walking, I found a small art gallery tucked between two old buildings. I entered quietly, noticing the scent of paint and wood. The walls were covered with modern art, photographs of the city's past, and abstract paintings. I walked slowly, reading the descriptions and reflecting on the meaning behind each piece. I realized that creativity and human expression were everywhere, even in places I would not expect. I wrote in my notebook, "Art teaches me patience, observation, and reflection. Understanding other people's perspectives helps me grow." In the afternoon, I decided to sit in a small park near the river. The sunlight reflected off the water, and I watched people jogging, walking dogs, and sitting quietly on benches. I noticed how each person had their own rhythm, their own story, and their own challenges. This observation made me feel connected to the city, even though I was a newcomer. I spent hours exploring the streets, talking to a few friendly shopkeepers, and writing my reflections in my notebook. I began to understand that the city was not just a place, but a living, breathing organism, and that my interactions, no matter how small, were part of its pulse. As evening approached, I returned to my apartment, tired but exhilarated. I made a simple dinner and reviewed my notes from the day. I reflected on the lessons I had learned. the importance of observation, the value of small achievements, and the growth that comes from stepping out of my comfort zone. Before sleeping, I wrote one last note for the day. Every experience, no matter how small, teaches me something. Every person I meet, every street I explore, every challenge I face is part of my transformation. I am learning patience, courage, and self-awareness. Tomorrow will bring new lessons, and I am ready. The following morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping gently against my window. The gray sky made the city feel quieter, slower, and more introspective. I drank a cup of tea while looking outside, noticing the reflections of streetlights on the wet pavement. I packed my bag carefully, making sure my notebook, pens, and a small umbrella were ready. I whispered to myself, "Rain or shine, I will explore. Today, I will notice things I haven't seen before." Stepping outside, I opened my umbrella and walked slowly down the familiar streets. People moved quickly under umbrellas, and cars splashed puddles onto the sidewalks. I smiled, realizing that the city had its own rhythm, and I had to move carefully to understand it. Each step was a lesson in patience and awareness. I decided to visit a small library tucked away in a quiet street. The library was warm and smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. I spent hours walking among the shelves, reading descriptions, flipping through pages, and discovering books about art, history, and science. I realized that knowledge was everywhere, waiting to be discovered if I just took the time to look. During my visit, I noticed a group of young students working on a project. They were discussing, laughing, and occasionally getting frustrated. I observed how they collaborated, and I thought about how teamwork and communication are essential skills, not only in school, but also in life. I wrote in my notebook, "Learning is not just about information, it's about interaction, patience, and understanding others." By afternoon, the rain had stopped, leaving puddles that reflected the city in a new light. I walked along the riverbank, watching people jogging, walking dogs, and sitting quietly on benches. I noticed how each person had a unique rhythm and story. This observation made me feel more connected to the city, even though I was still learning its ways. Later, I wandered into a street filled with small markets. Vendors shouted their prices, people bargained, and the energy was overwhelming but vibrant. I bought some fresh fruit, carefully asking for the price and thanking the vendors politely. I realized that even simple interactions were lessons in courage, independence, and social skill. As the evening approached, I found a quiet park bench near the river. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink. I reflected on my day, writing in my notebook. Today, I explored more than streets. I explored people, stories, and myself. I realized that growth comes from attention, effort, and reflection. Each encounter, each observation, each small achievement adds up to transformation. The city is alive, and I am becoming part of its rhythm. Returning home, I made a simple dinner and reviewed my notes. I felt tired, but proud. I whispered to myself, "Every day teaches me patience, courage, and understanding. Every step, every challenge, and every small success shapes who I am becoming. Tomorrow will bring new lessons, and I will be ready to face them." Before sleeping, I reflected on the week. I realized that even small observations, small conversations, and small actions were essential for personal growth. I wrote one last line for the day. I am learning to live fully, observe carefully, and embrace challenges. Each day is a step forward, a step toward understanding the world and myself. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The sky was pale and the city was quiet, almost as if it were holding its breath. I made a cup of coffee and looked out the window, thinking about the day ahead. Today, I decided, I would explore a part of the city I had never been to before, a district known for its small art studios, local workshops, and tiny cafes that were tucked away in narrow streets. Stepping outside, I noticed the sounds of the city slowly waking up, the hum of distant traffic, a few joggers on the sidewalks, birds chirping in small parks, and the occasional clatter of construction work. I walked carefully, taking my time, observing every detail. Each street had its own character, and I felt as if I were discovering a secret story behind every corner. My first stop was a small pottery studio. I watched the artists shaping clay on their wheels, their hands steady and precise. I asked if I could try, and the main artist smiled, handing me a small lump of clay. My first attempt was messy, clay slipping from my fingers, a cup collapsing before it took shape. But I laughed and tried again. The artist encouraged me. Mistakes are part of learning. Keep going. I realized that growth wasn't about instant perfection. It was about persistence, patience, and willingness to start over. After leaving the studio, I wandered into a street full of tiny bookstores. I entered one and immediately smelled the comforting scent of old paper and ink. I walked slowly between the shelves, picking up books about topics I had never explored before: philosophy, local history, and even poetry in languages I barely understood. I wrote in my notebook, "Curiosity is a skill. Learning is endless. Every book, every story, every idea can change the way I see the world." In the afternoon, I decided to visit a small cafe known for attracting artists, writers, and musicians. I ordered a coffee and sat near the window, observing the people around me. A young musician was tuning his guitar, while a writer scribbled notes furiously. I realized that creativity and focus existed everywhere, even in the hum of everyday life. I wrote, "Being present, observing, and learning from others is as important as formal lessons. Life teaches in small moments." As the sun began to set, I walked to a small bridge overlooking the river. The sky was painted with shades of pink, purple, and gold. People walked slowly across the bridge, some alone, some in pairs, others in small groups. I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the day. The mistakes, the successes, the lessons, and the small interactions. I took out my notebook and wrote a reflection. Today I faced challenges, tried new things, observed new people, and learned more about myself. The city is alive with energy, ideas, and stories. I'm learning to move carefully, observe closely, and grow constantly. Each day, I understand more about patience, courage, and resilience. Walking back home, I felt a sense of calm and achievement. The city lights reflected on wet streets, and I realized that even in chaos, there was beauty. I thought about the weeks I had spent here and how much I had grown. I wrote my last note for the day. Every day is a lesson. Every encounter teaches something. Growth is not instant. It is built moment by moment. I am learning to live fully, think deeply, and act with courage. Tomorrow, I will continue this journey, ready for new experiences, challenges, and discoveries. Before sleeping, I reflected on the transformation I had undergone, from someone overwhelmed by the city to someone who could navigate it with curiosity, patience, and resilience. I smiled, knowing that each day, each step, and each observation was shaping me into the person I wanted to become. The next morning, I woke up to the soft light filtering through my curtains. I had developed a habit. Each morning, I would spend at least half an hour reflecting, planning, and preparing for the day. I made tea, opened my notebook, and wrote a few sentences about yesterday's experiences. The people I met, the mistakes I made, the small victories, and the lessons I learned. I wrote, "Today I will step further out of my comfort zone. I will try new experiences, meet new people, and observe as much as I can. Every small action contributes to my growth." I left my apartment and headed toward a neighborhood I had only visited once. The streets were narrower, lined with old brick buildings and small courtyards. I noticed a group of elderly people playing chess outside a cafe. I walked closer and watched them quietly, observing their focus, patience, and subtle strategies. One of the men looked up, smiled, and said, "Would you like to play?" I hesitated, feeling nervous, but then nodded. Sitting across from him, I realized that every moment was an opportunity to learn. He didn't just teach me chess, he taught me calmness, concentration, and the importance of thinking several steps ahead in life. When I finally left, I felt a mix of joy and gratitude. Continuing my walk, I stumbled upon a small community garden tucked between buildings. The smell of flowers, herbs, and fresh soil filled the air. Volunteers were tending to plants, watering, pruning, and planting new seeds. I watched and learned how every little action contributed to the bigger picture. I thought about how this applied to life. Small, consistent efforts eventually lead to significant results. I wrote in my notebook, "Growth, like a garden, requires patience, care, and consistency. Even tiny actions can produce meaningful outcomes if we continue every day." In the afternoon, I attended a workshop at a local studio. It was a session on creative writing and storytelling. I sat among strangers, some older, some younger, and listened to their stories. When it was my turn, I shared a personal experience and hesitated at first, unsure of how it will be received. To my surprise, the group listened attentively, offering feedback and encouragement. I realized that vulnerability is not weakness. It is a powerful tool for connection and learning. As the sun began to set, I walked along the riverbank, reflecting on the day. I watched the reflections of the city lights on the water, the movement of people, and the subtle changes in the environment. I wrote, "Today taught me that growth is not always obvious. It happens quietly, gradually, and often in unexpected ways. Patience, courage, observation, and openness are keys to understanding the world and myself. Every interaction, every moment, and every challenge contributes to the transformation." Before going to sleep, I wrote one final reflection for the day. I am learning to live fully, embrace challenges, and value small actions. Each day builds upon the previous one. Every experience, every person, every observation adds to my growth. Transformation is not a destination. It is a continuous journey. Tomorrow, I will continue walking, learning, and growing, ready for whatever the city and life bring me.